The morning I found the bright orange citation taped to my chicken coop was the same morning I realized just how far the Willowbrook Heights HOA was willing to go to make my life miserable. I am Blake Richardson, and I had moved to this quiet subdivision outside Nashville, Tennessee about 18 months ago, looking for a peaceful place to start over after my divorce. The 2-acre property seemed perfect. It had enough land for my hobbies, a decent house that needed some work but had good bones, and most importantly, it was far enough from the city that I could keep chickens. At least, that is what I thought when I signed the papers. The trouble started in October, when the temperatures began dropping at night. I had 6 beautiful hens that had been producing eggs reliably since spring. These were not just any chickens to me. After my marriage fell apart, and I lost pretty much everything in the settlement, these birds represented a fresh start. They gave me a reason to get up in the morning, something to care for that actually appreciated the effort I put in. When the weather forecast showed temperatures dipping into the 20s, I did what any responsible chicken owner would do. I installed a small heating system in the coop. Nothing fancy, just a couple of heat lamps and an insulated panel heater designed specifically for poultry housing. The whole setup cost me about $200, and it kept my girls comfortable through the cold nights. For 2 months, everything was fine. My hens kept laying through the winter, which was exactly what I had hoped for. I had even started sharing eggs with some of my neighbors. Mrs. Patterson 3 doors down had been getting a dozen eggs every week. The Johnsons next door took a dozen every other week. Even grumpy old Mr. Henderson had started coming by for eggs after his wife mentioned how much better they tasted than store-bought. Then Patricia Whitmore got elected as the new HOA president. I had seen Patricia around the neighborhood before. She was one of those women who always looked like she was about to demand to speak to a manager. Every time I saw her, she was wearing some variation of the same outfit. Capri pants, a polo shirt, and a visor, like she was perpetually ready for a golf game she was never actually going to play. Her blonde hair was always cut in that exact asymmetrical bob that seemed to be a requirement for a certain type of suburban woman. And she had this way of pursing her lips when she looked at you, like everything you did was somehow offensive to her personal sensibilities. The citation was printed on official HOA letterhead, complete with the neighborhood logo. It informed me that my heated chicken coop was in violation of Section 7, Paragraph 3, Subsection B of the HOA bylaws, which apparently prohibited structures that create excessive energy consumption visible from adjacent properties due to external indicators of power usage. I read that sentence 5 times before I understood what they were even trying to say. The heat lamps in my coop were visible through the window at night. That was it. That was the whole violation. You could see a soft glow coming from the coop after dark. The citation went on to explain that I had 15 days to remove the heating system or face daily fines of $100. It was signed by Patricia Whitmore in this elaborate, looping signature that looked like she had spent an hour practicing it. I stood there in my backyard, the November wind cutting through my jacket, and felt my blood pressure rising. This was absurd. The bylaws I had reviewed before buying the house said nothing about chicken coops, much less about whether or not you could heat them. I had checked specifically because I knew I wanted chickens. That afternoon, I dug out my copy of the HOA bylaws from my filing cabinet. I went through every single page, reading each section carefully. Section 7 dealt with exterior modifications to properties. Paragraph 3 was about landscape lighting. Subsection B mentioned that exterior lighting should not create a nuisance for neighboring properties. There was nothing about chicken coops. Nothing about heating systems. Nothing that could reasonably be interpreted to mean that my heat lamps were a violation of anything. I decided to handle this the mature way. I would go to Patricia, explain the situation, and clear up this obvious misunderstanding. Maybe she was new to the job and had gotten confused about the bylaws. Maybe someone had complained, and she had overreacted without really looking into the rules. Either way, I figured we could work it out like adults. That assumption turned out to be incredibly naive. Patricia lived in one of the largest houses in Willowbrook Heights, a sprawling McMansion at the end of Oakmont Drive with columns that served no structural purpose, and a lawn that looked like it had been manicured with scissors. I rang the doorbell at 4 in the afternoon on a Thursday, the citation and my copy of the bylaws tucked under my arm. She answered the door in her usual uniform, though this time she had added a cardigan. "Blake," she said, my name sounding like an accusation. "I assume you are here about the citation." "I am," I said, keeping my tone friendly. "I think there might be some confusion about the bylaws. I have been reading through them, and I cannot find anything that my chicken coop actually violates." Her expression did not change. "The board has interpreted Section 7, Paragraph 3, Subsection B to include any visible indication of excessive power usage that detracts from the aesthetic uniformity of the neighborhood." "But that section is about landscape lighting," I said, "and my coop is not even visible from the street. The only way you can see the heat lamps is if you are standing in my backyard." "Nevertheless," Patricia said, and I was starting to realize that this was one of her favorite words, "the board has made its determination. The heating system must be removed or you will face fines." "Can I at least come to the next board meeting and discuss this?" I asked. "Maybe explain why the heating system is necessary for the welfare of the chickens." She pursed her lips even tighter, if that was possible. "The next board meeting is not until January 15th. Your compliance deadline is November 28th. I suggest you address the violation promptly." "So you are telling me I have to remove the only thing keeping my chickens alive through freezing temperatures, and I do not even get a chance to appeal until after the deadline?" The frustration was creeping into my voice despite my best efforts. "The bylaws are clear, Blake. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to file a formal complaint, but it will not change your compliance deadline." She started to close the door. "Wait," I said. "Just help me understand something. Why does this matter? The coop is in my backyard. It is not bothering anyone. The chickens are quiet. I am not running some kind of industrial farm here." Patricia gave me this tight little smile that did not reach her eyes. "Willowbrook Heights is a premier community with property values to maintain. When residents start turning their yards into little farms, it affects everyone. Today it is a heated chicken coop. Tomorrow it is goats or pigs or who knows what else. We have standards, Blake. Either you respect them, or perhaps this neighborhood is not the right fit for you." She closed the door before I could respond. I walked back to my truck feeling like I had just been hit by a bus. This was not about bylaws or lighting or aesthetic uniformity. This was about control. Patricia had decided that she did not like my chickens, and she was going to use her position to force me to get rid of them. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Marcus Webb, and he specialized in property law and HOA disputes. His office was in downtown Nashville, and he agreed to see me that afternoon. Marcus was a broad-shouldered guy in his 50s with silver hair and a firm handshake. He listened to my story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Okay," he said. "Here is the situation. Yes, their interpretation of the bylaw is a stretch at best. In fact, I would say it is completely unreasonable. However, HOAs have broad latitude in how they interpret their own bylaws, especially in Tennessee. Unless you can prove that they are acting in bad faith or discriminating against you specifically, it is very difficult to challenge their rulings. But I showed you the bylaws, I said. There is nothing in there about chicken coops or heating systems. I know, Marcus said, but they are claiming it falls under exterior modifications and lighting standards. A judge might look at that and say it is a reasonable interpretation, even if we disagree. The bigger problem is that fighting this will cost you. We are talking about thousands of dollars in legal fees for something that might not go your way. I felt my stomach sink. So what do I do? You have a few options, Marcus said. 1. You can remove the heating system and comply with the citation. 2. You can keep the system and pay the fines while we fight this in court. 3. You can find a different solution that technically complies with their ruling, but still keeps your chickens warm. What kind of different solution? I asked. Marcus shrugged. Get creative. They are saying the visible heat lamps are the problem, right? So make them not visible. Move the coop. Use a different heating method. Find a loophole. I left his office feeling defeated but with the germ of an idea forming. If Patricia wanted to play technical games with the bylaws, I could play too. Over the weekend, I did some research. It turned out that the heated chicken coop had become somewhat famous in the neighborhood, though I had not realized it. When I had started sharing eggs with the neighbors, word had spread. I was not selling them, just giving them away to anyone who wanted them. Fresh eggs, fertile and delicious, coming from hens that were well cared for and happy. I had not thought much about it, but apparently about 15 families in Willowbrook Heights had been getting eggs from me on a regular basis. Some people came by every week, others every couple of weeks. I had started keeping a notebook just to track who had gotten eggs when, so I could distribute them fairly. Mrs. Patterson stopped by on Saturday morning while I was in the coop checking on the hens. She was a sweet woman in her 70s, a widow who lived alone and had become one of my favorite neighbors. "Blake, dear," she said, her breath misting in the cold air. "I heard about the citation. Is it true? Are they making you shut down the coop?" "They are making me remove the heating system," I said. "I am trying to figure out what to do." Her face fell. "Oh no, I was afraid of this. Patricia came by my house last week asking questions about where I was getting my eggs. I told her about your wonderful hens, and she got this look on her face. I should have kept my mouth shut." "It is not your fault, Mrs. Patterson," I said. "Patricia has had it out for me since she became HOA president. This was going to happen sooner or later." "But what will happen to your chickens?" she asked. "They cannot survive without heat, can they?" "I am working on a solution," I said, though I was not sure I believed it myself. The next person to stop by was Dave Johnson from next door. Dave was in his 40s, a contractor who worked long hours and had 3 kids. His wife Jennifer had been getting eggs from me twice a month. "Dude," Dave said, leaning against my fence. "Jennifer is freaking out about the egg situation. She says yours are the only ones the kids will eat without complaining. Is there any way you can keep this going?" "I am trying," I said. "But the HOA is pretty clear. I have until November 28th to remove the heating system." Dave shook his head. "Patricia is such a piece of work. You know, she tried to fine me last year because my garbage cans were visible from the street on a non-collection day. My kid had left them out after school, and she hit me with a $50 fine. I swear that woman just drives around looking for things to complain about." This gave me an idea. "Dave, how many other people do you know who have had problems with Patricia?" he laughed. "Man, pretty much everyone." "Why?" "Just curious," I said. But the wheels in my mind were turning. Over the next few days, I started talking to more neighbors. What I discovered was that Patricia had made herself extremely unpopular in her 6 months as HOA president. She had issued citations for everything from slightly overgrown grass to Christmas decorations that stayed up too long to cars parked in driveways instead of garages. She had tried to pass new rules about what colors people could paint their front doors and what types of mailboxes were acceptable. But none of that helped my immediate problem. I still had a deadline, and I still needed to figure out how to keep my chickens alive through the winter. That is when I remembered something. My property was 2 acres. Most of that land stretched behind my house, far from the street and from the neighboring properties. The chicken coop was currently located about 30 feet from my back door, in an area that was technically visible from Dave Johnson's yard and from the yard of the house behind mine. But if I moved the coop to the far back corner of my property, it would not be visible from anywhere except my own house. There was a small grove of trees back there that would provide natural cover. No one would be able to see the heat lamps. No one would even know the coop was there unless they came onto my property. The more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Patricia's citation specifically mentioned visible from adjacent properties. If the coop was not visible from adjacent properties, then her justification for the citation disappeared. On Monday morning, I called out sick from my job at the automotive parts warehouse, where I worked as a logistics coordinator. I had been there for 3 years and had plenty of sick days saved up. I spent the day at the feed store in Brentwood, talking to the owner about the best way to relocate a chicken coop. The owner, a weathered farmer named Tom who had been raising poultry for 40 years, thought my plan was sound. The hens might be stressed for a few days from the move, he said. But if you keep their routine the same and make sure the new location has everything they need, they will adjust fine. Chickens are tougher than people think. I bought supplies for the move: extra fence panels, fresh bedding, a new feeder to replace the old one that was getting rusty anyway. Tom also sold me a different type of heating system, one that was completely enclosed inside a metal housing. "Can't see any light from these," he said. "They are what we use in commercial operations. Same heat output but no visible glow. Perfect." I took the rest of the week off work, telling my boss I had a family emergency. It was not exactly a lie. These chickens were the closest thing I had to family these days. The relocation project turned out to be bigger than I had anticipated. First, I had to clear the area in the far corner of my property. The grove of trees provided good cover, but the ground was uneven and covered in old leaves and debris. I spent Tuesday clearing and leveling a space large enough for the coop and a decent run for the chickens. Wednesday, I started dismantling the existing coop. I had built it myself when I first got the chickens, and I had constructed it in sections specifically so it could be moved if needed. I had not imagined I would actually need to move it, but I was grateful for the foresight. Each section came apart and went onto my truck. I made multiple trips back and forth across my property, hauling the pieces to the new location. My back was screaming by the end of the day, but the structure was starting to take shape in its new home. Thursday, I reassembled everything. The new heating system went in, along with fresh insulation I had bought to make sure the coop stayed warm even in the coldest weather. I added extra nesting boxes and a better ventilation system. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Friday morning, I moved the chickens. I caught each hen individually and carried her in a pet carrier to the new location. They squawked and complained, but once I put them in the new coop with fresh food and water, they settled down. I spent the rest of the day reinforcing the fence and making sure everything was predator-proof. By Friday evening, the job was complete. The chicken coop stood in the far corner of my property, completely invisible from any neighboring yard. The new heating system kept the interior at a comfortable temperature with no visible light. The hens were already roosting on their perches, looking content. I walked back to my house feeling triumphant. Patricia wanted to play games. Fine. I had moved my coop to a location that was still on my property, still legal, and still provided everything my chickens needed. And there was not a thing she could say about it, because the whole justification for her citation had been about visibility. Saturday morning, I was drinking coffee on my back porch when I saw Patricia walking across my backyard. She had not bothered to ring the doorbell or announce herself. She was just marching across my property like she owned it. "Excuse me," I called out. "Can I help you with something?" She turned to face me, her expression sour. "Where is your chicken coop, Blake?" "On my property," I said. "Why, do not play games with me. The coop was here." She gestured to the empty space where it had been. "Where did you move it?" "I moved it to comply with your citation," I said. "The violation was that the heating system was visible from adjacent properties. I moved the coop to a location where it is not visible from adjacent properties." Problem solved. Her face was turning red. "You cannot just move structures around your property without HOA approval." "Actually, I can," I said. "I had checked this with Marcus the lawyer. The bylaws say I need approval for new structures. This is not a new structure. It is an existing structure in a different location on my own property. There is nothing in the bylaws that requires approval for moving something I already own." Patricia was practically shaking with anger. "I will be discussing this with the board." "You do that," I said. "And while you are at it, you might want to note that I have fully complied with your citation. The heating system is no longer visible from adjacent properties. Have a great weekend, Patricia." She turned and stomped off across my yard. I watched her go, feeling a satisfaction I had not felt in months. The satisfaction lasted until Monday morning when I found Mrs. Patterson on my doorstep, crying. "Blake," she said, her voice shaking. "Patricia came to my house yesterday. She told me that if I keep getting eggs from you, she is going to fine me for participating in an unlicensed food distribution operation. She said it is a health code violation." I felt anger surge through me. "She said what?" "She has been going around to everyone," Mrs. Patterson said. "Everyone who has been getting eggs from you. She told all of us the same thing. We could be fined or even face legal action if we keep accepting your eggs." "That is complete nonsense," I said. "There is no law against giving away eggs. I am not selling them. I am not running a business. She is just making stuff up to bully people." "I know, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, "but I am on a fixed income. I cannot afford to fight the HOA or pay fines. I am sorry, but I cannot take any more eggs from you." Over the next 2 days, the same scene repeated itself with nearly every neighbor who had been getting eggs from me. Dave Johnson came by, apologetic and frustrated. The Hendersons, the Martinez family from Birch Street, the Thompsons, the Chens. All of them had gotten visits from Patricia or letters from the HOA threatening consequences if they continued to accept eggs from me. By Wednesday evening, my entire egg distribution network had evaporated. I was suddenly left with 6 hens producing about 4 dozen eggs a week and no one willing to take them. I called Marcus the lawyer again. He listened to my story and sighed. "Blake, what she is doing is unethical, but it is not illegal. She is not actually fining anyone. She is just threatening to. And unless someone wants to call her bluff and fight it, there is not much we can do." "So she gets away with this," I said, "For now," Marcus said, "but keep documenting everything. Every conversation, every threat, every action she takes. If she crosses a line, we will have ammunition." I hung up feeling defeated. Patricia had won. I still had my chickens and my heated coop, but what was the point if I was going to be drowning in eggs I could not give away? That is when things got really interesting. The following Saturday, Dave Johnson came running up to my house around 9 in the morning. He was out of breath and his eyes were wide. "Dude," he panted, "you have to see this. Patricia is freaking out." "About what?" I asked. "Just come look," he said. I followed him down the street to where a small crowd had gathered in front of Patricia's house. Patricia herself was standing on her front lawn in a bathrobe, yelling into her phone. "What is going on?" I asked one of the neighbors, a guy named Steve who lived a few houses down from Patricia. "Someone egged her house," Steve said, trying not to smile. "Like, completely covered it. There must be 100 eggs on her windows and front door. It is everywhere." I looked at Patricia's house. He was not exaggerating. The entire front of her McMansion was dripping with egg yolk and broken shells. It looked like someone had spent significant time and ammunition on this project. Patricia spotted me in the crowd. "This was you," she screamed, pointing at me. "You did this." "I have been home all night," I said calmly, "and I can prove it. I was on a video call with my brother in Seattle from 9 until midnight. Phone records will show that. This was true. My brother and I had spent 3 hours on FaceTime the night before, catching up after months of missed connections. I had been sitting in my living room the entire time, visible on camera." "You put someone up to it then," Patricia said. "This is harassment." A police car pulled up and 2 officers got out. Patricia immediately launched into a tirade about vandalism and harassment and how I was responsible. The officers listened patiently, then came over to talk to me. "Sir, were you involved in this incident?" one of them asked. His name tag said Officer Martinez. "No, sir," I said. "I was home all night on a video call with my brother. I have phone records and he will verify it. I did not egg Patricia's house and I do not know who did." The officer nodded and made some notes. They talked to a few other neighbors, took pictures of the damage, and told Patricia they would file a report. Then they left. The crowd dispersed slowly, with people whispering and casting glances back at the egg-covered house. I walked back home, my mind racing. I genuinely had no idea who had egged Patricia's house, but I had a strong suspicion it was not going to be the last act of rebellion against her reign as HOA president. Sure enough, the following Tuesday, Patricia's mailbox was knocked over. Wednesday, someone scattered birdseed all over her perfectly manicured lawn, attracting every pigeon and crow in the area. Thursday, her garbage cans were tipped over at 3 in the morning, spilling trash across her driveway. Patricia was convinced I was behind all of it. She filed complaint after complaint with the police, but I had alibis for everything. The night the mailbox was knocked over, I was at a late movie showing of a new action film with Dave Johnson and 2 other guys from the neighborhood. We had tickets and credit card receipts to prove it. The birdseed incident happened while I was at work, with time cards and security footage to verify my presence. The garbage can incident occurred while I was sound asleep, though I could not exactly prove that one, but I also could not be directly connected to it. The HOA called an emergency meeting in mid-December. I made sure to attend. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that usually hosted kids' birthday parties and book clubs. About 40 people showed up, which was a huge turnout for an HOA meeting. Usually these things drew maybe 10 people, mostly board members and a few complainers. Patricia stood at the front of the room, her face pinched and angry. The rest of the board sat at a table behind her. Karen Winters, the vice president, Tom Ashford, the treasurer, and Linda Simmons, the secretary. They all looked uncomfortable. "We are here tonight to address a serious issue of harassment and vandalism," Patricia began. "As many of you know, I have been targeted repeatedly over the past few weeks by malicious acts. My house was vandalized, my property has been damaged, and I have reason to believe that Blake Richardson is responsible." She pointed at me in the audience. Everyone turned to look. "I have not vandalized anything," I said loudly, "and I have alibis for every incident you have mentioned." "Convenient," Patricia said. "You always seem to have an alibi, but the vandalism started right after I cited you for your illegal chicken coop." "The chicken coop is not illegal," I said. "And I fully complied with your citation by moving it to a location where the heating system is not visible from adjacent properties." A murmur went through the crowd. Some people were nodding. "Furthermore," Patricia said, raising her voice, "Blake has been operating an unlicensed food distribution business from his property, providing eggs to residents without proper permits or health inspections." "I have been giving away eggs," I said, "to friends and neighbors for free." "There is no business. There are no permits required for giving away food." "That is not how the health department sees it," Patricia said. She pulled out a piece of paper. "I have here a letter from the Davidson County Health Department stating that anyone distributing food products, even for free, must adhere to certain safety standards." I felt my stomach drop. She had actually contacted the health department about me. "May I see that letter?" asked an older man in the front row. I recognized him as Robert Chen, a retired attorney who lived on Maple Drive. Patricia hesitated, then handed him the paper. Robert read it carefully, then looked up at her. "This letter does not say what you claim it says. This is a general information sheet about cottage food laws. It does not mention Blake by name, and it specifically states that personal food sharing among friends and neighbors does not require permits or inspections. You are misrepresenting this document." Patricia snatched the paper back. "The intent is clear. Blake is running an operation that violates community standards." "No," said Dave Johnson, standing up from his seat. "Blake has been helping out his neighbors by sharing his eggs, and you have been bullying people into not accepting them. My wife got a threatening letter from you saying we would be fined if we kept taking eggs. That is harassment, Patricia, not what is happening to your mailbox." Other people started speaking up. Mrs. Patterson stood up, her voice shaking but determined. "Blake has been nothing but kind to me. He gives me eggs every week, never asks for anything in return. You are the one causing problems in this neighborhood, Patricia. You have been issuing citations for ridiculous things and making everyone miserable." More voices joined in. People started listing grievances against Patricia. The Christmas decoration fines, the garbage can nonsense, the proposed rules about front door colors. The meeting devolved into chaos with multiple people talking over each other. Finally, Tom Ashford, the treasurer, stood up. "Enough," he said. He was a big guy with a booming voice, and everyone quieted down. "Patricia, I think we need to have a board meeting to discuss your approach to HOA management. This has gotten out of hand." "I am the president," Patricia said. "I am enforcing the bylaws as written." "No," said Linda Simmons, the secretary. "You are interpreting the bylaws in whatever way lets you harass people you do not like. I have been keeping records of every citation you have issued in the past 6 months. You have issued 47 citations. In the entire previous year, the HOA issued 12 citations total. You are out of control." Patricia looked around the room, her face red. "If you all want to live in a neighborhood that looks like a barnyard, fine. But do not come crying to me when your property values drop and this place turns into a slum." She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the meeting. The room erupted in conversation. Karen Winters, the vice president, stood up. "Okay," she said. "I am officially calling for a vote of no confidence in Patricia Whitmore as HOA president." All in favor. Nearly every hand in the room went up. "Motion carries," Karen said. "I am assuming the role of acting president until we can hold a proper election." First order of business. Blake, your chicken coop is fine. Keep doing what you are doing. Second order of business. All citations issued by Patricia in the last 6 months are under review. If you got cited for something ridiculous, bring me your paperwork and we will sort it out. Meeting adjourned. People actually applauded. I walked out of that meeting feeling like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Several neighbors came up to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Mrs. Patterson gave me a hug and asked when she could start getting eggs again. "How about tomorrow?" I said, and her face lit up. Things were quiet for a few days after that. Patricia did not resign officially, but she stopped showing up to board meetings and stopped responding to HOA emails. Karen Winters took over all the presidential duties and started undoing a lot of Patricia's more ridiculous rules. I thought the drama was over. I was wrong. On December 23rd, I woke up to find my chicken coop had been destroyed. Not damaged. Destroyed. Someone had taken a sledgehammer or an axe to it. The walls were smashed in. The fence was knocked down. The heating system was torn out and thrown into the woods, and my chickens were gone. I stood there in the freezing morning air, staring at the wreckage, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. These were not just chickens to me. They were my companions, my project, my fresh start, and someone had taken them away. I called the police immediately. Officer Martinez showed up along with another officer named Jenkins. They walked through the destruction, taking photos and making notes. "You have any idea who might have done this?" Martinez asked. "I have a pretty good idea," I said. "Patricia Whitmore has been harassing me for months about this chicken coop. She got voted out as HOA president a few days ago, and she was really angry about it." "That is a serious accusation," Jenkins said. "Do you have any proof?" "No," I admitted, "but she has motive. She tried everything she could to get rid of my chickens legally, and when that did not work, this happens." "We will talk to her," Martinez said. "But without witnesses or physical evidence, it is going to be hard to prove anything." They left, and I spent the rest of the day cleaning up the wreckage. Dave Johnson came over to help along with a few other neighbors. We hauled away the broken wood and salvaged what we could. "We will help you rebuild," Dave said. "Seriously, whatever you need." I appreciated the sentiment, but I was not thinking about rebuilding. I was thinking about my chickens. Where were they? Were they still alive? I spent the afternoon driving around the neighborhood and the surrounding area, looking for any sign of them. Chickens do not usually wander far from home, but if they had been scared or chased, they could be anywhere. Around 4 in the afternoon, I got a call from a woman named Susan who lived about half a mile away, just outside the Willowbrook Heights boundaries. "Hi," she said. "I think I have your chickens. 6 hens. They showed up in my yard this morning. They look cold and scared, but they are okay." Relief flooded through me. "I will be right there." Susan turned out to be a nice lady in her 60s who had a small farm with goats and a couple of horses. She had corralled my chickens into an empty stall in her barn and given them food and water. "They are sweet birds," she said. "I heard about the HOA lady giving you trouble. Everyone around here knows about it. The drama has spread beyond your subdivision." I thanked her profusely and loaded my chickens into carriers. They were cold and stressed but otherwise unharmed. I took them home and set them up temporarily in my garage with heat lamps and bedding. It was not ideal, but it was warm and safe. That night, I got a call from Officer Martinez. "Blake, we went to Patricia Whitmore's house to ask her some questions about the incident with your chicken coop. And," I said, "she is gone. The house is empty. Neighbors say they saw a moving truck there yesterday. Looks like she packed up and left in a hurry." I sat down heavily on my couch. "So she destroys my property and then flees." "We are looking into it," Martinez said. "We will file charges if we can develop enough evidence. Her leaving town looks suspicious, which actually helps our case. We will be in touch." Over the next few days, the full story came out. Patricia had not just left town. She had abandoned her house entirely. According to the neighbors on her street, she had loaded up a moving truck in the middle of the night on December 22nd and driven away without telling anyone. The HOA board did some digging and discovered that Patricia was facing financial problems. Her house was in foreclosure. She had stopped paying HOA dues months ago, even while serving as president. She had apparently been using her position to bully other residents as a way of distracting from her own issues. As for the chicken coop destruction, the police found security camera footage from a neighbor's house that showed Patricia's car driving past my house multiple times on the night of December 22nd. While that was not definitive proof, it was enough for them to issue a warrant for criminal mischief and destruction of property. Patricia was eventually tracked down in Knoxville, where she had moved in with her sister. She was arrested in late January and extradited back to Nashville to face charges. The criminal case took several months to wind through the system, but in the end, she pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and was sentenced to probation, community service, and ordered to pay me restitution for the destroyed chicken coop. The restitution check arrived in March. It was enough to rebuild the coop properly, with better materials and a more secure design. Meanwhile, the Willowbrook Heights HOA underwent some serious reforms. Karen Winters served as acting president and organized a proper election in February. A guy named Michael Torres, a reasonable middle-aged engineer who actually cared about the neighborhood, was elected president. One of his first acts was to officially add language to the bylaws clarifying that chicken coops, vegetable gardens, and other small-scale homesteading activities were allowed as long as they were maintained properly. The new board also implemented a review process for citations, so no one person could abuse their authority the way Patricia had. And they added term limits for board positions, ensuring that no one could stay in power long enough to become a tyrant. By early April, I had rebuilt the chicken coop in its far corner location. It was better than before, with solar panels on the roof to power the heating system, better insulation, and a design that could withstand pretty much anything short of a tornado. My 6 hens settled back into their routine and started laying again. The egg distribution network resumed, with Mrs. Patterson and the Johnsons and all my other neighbors grateful to have fresh eggs once more. One warm Saturday morning in May, I was in the backyard with my chickens when Dave Johnson came over with his kids. They loved visiting the hens and collecting eggs. "You know," Dave said, watching his youngest daughter carefully pick up an egg from a nesting box, "this whole mess with Patricia actually brought the neighborhood together. People are talking to each other more. We have a community garden now over by the playground. The Chens are teaching a cooking class using fresh vegetables. It is like everyone realized that we are actually a community, not just houses next to each other." I watched the little girl cradle the egg carefully in both hands. Her face lit up with wonder, and I smiled. "Yeah," I said. I guess sometimes it takes a villain to remind everyone what is important. Plus, you are kind of a legend now, Dave said, grinning. The guy who stood up to the crazy HOA lady and won. People are still talking about it. I laughed. I did not do anything special. I just wanted to keep my chickens warm. Sometimes that is all it takes, Dave said. That afternoon, Mrs. Patterson stopped by for her weekly dozen eggs. She brought me a homemade peach pie as thanks, something she did every few weeks because she insisted she needed to repay my generosity somehow. "Blake, dear," she said as I walked her to her car, eggs in hand. "I have been meaning to tell you something. When all that trouble was happening with Patricia, I was so scared. I am old and I am alone, and the idea of fighting the HOA or getting fined terrified me. But watching you stand up to her, even when it was hard, that gave me courage. I have started standing up for myself more. Little things, but it matters. So thank you for that." She patted my hand and drove away, leaving me standing in my driveway feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. The legal aftermath of Patricia's actions continued to play out through the summer. In addition to the criminal charges, several residents filed a civil suit against her for harassment and abuse of authority. I was part of that suit, along with Dave Johnson and about 10 other residents who had been unfairly targeted during her reign. The civil case was settled out of court in August. Patricia's homeowner's insurance ended up covering most of the settlement, and we each received a modest payout. I used my portion to buy more chickens. I now had 12 hens and a rooster, and I was producing enough eggs to supply half the neighborhood. I also built a proper farm stand at the end of my driveway where neighbors could pick up eggs on an honor system. I put out a dozen eggs each morning with a little note saying they were free, and every evening the eggs would be gone, and there would be new notes thanking me or recipes people wanted to share or little gifts left in return. Jars of jam, fresh bread, vegetables from people's gardens. It became a little hub of community exchange. The rooster, which I named Gerald for no particular reason, became something of a neighborhood mascot. He was a handsome bird with an impressive crow that you could hear every morning at sunrise. Some people complained about the noise at first, but Gerald won them over. There was something comforting about his crow, a rural touch in our suburban landscape that reminded people to slow down and appreciate the simple things. In September, the local newspaper did a story about the HOA drama and its aftermath. The reporter interviewed me, several of my neighbors, and even got a statement from Karen Winters about the reforms the HOA had implemented. The article painted Patricia as a cautionary tale about what happens when small amounts of power go to someone's head. The article went semi-viral in Nashville, and then got picked up by some national websites that focused on HOA horror stories. For a few weeks, I got emails and messages from people all over the country sharing their own nightmare HOA experiences. Some were worse than mine. Some were darkly funny. All of them reinforced my belief that HOAs, while well-intentioned in theory, often became tools for petty tyrants to make other people miserable. By October, exactly 1 year after Patricia's first citation, life had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I had my chickens, my eggs, my neighbors, and my peace of mind. The new HOA board was functioning well, making reasonable decisions and actually improving the neighborhood instead of just nitpicking at people. I had even started dating someone, a woman named Wendy Morrison who worked at the feed store where I bought chicken supplies. She thought the whole HOA story was hilarious and was charmed by my commitment to my birds. We took things slow, both of us having been burned before, but it was nice to have someone to share my life with again. One evening in late October, I was sitting on my back porch with Wendy, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. The chickens were settling into their coop for the night, making their soft, clucking sounds. Gerald gave one last crow as if saying good night to the neighborhood. "You know what is funny?" Wendy said. "A year ago you were dealing with all that drama and stress, and now look at this. You have got this whole setup, the chickens are thriving, you are happy. Patricia tried to ruin your life and instead you ended up better off." "I would not say she tried to ruin my life," I said. "She just could not stand that I was doing something she did not like." "Same thing," Wendy said. "Small-minded people cannot handle when others do not conform to their narrow view of how life should be lived. But you stood your ground, and you won." I thought about that. I do not know if I won exactly. I just refused to let her bully me into giving up something I cared about. "That is what winning looks like," Wendy said. She squeezed my hand. "Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and being happy." We sat there as the light faded and the stars came out, and I realized she was right. Patricia had tried to take away my chickens, my peace, and my place in the community. Instead, she had lost everything while I had gained more than I ever expected. The chickens had started it all. My determination to keep them warm and safe had put me in Patricia's crosshairs. But that same determination had also revealed who my real friends and neighbors were, had brought the community together, and had ultimately led to positive changes for everyone in Willowbrook Heights. As winter approached again, I made sure the heated chicken coop was in perfect condition. The new heating system worked flawlessly, the insulation was solid, and the structure was secure against any weather. My 12 hens and Gerald were ready for whatever the cold months brought, and this time there was no citation, no harassment, no drama. Just the quiet satisfaction of caring for my birds and sharing the abundance with my neighbors. The egg supply that Patricia had tried so hard to eliminate had become a cornerstone of the neighborhood community. People relied on those eggs. They looked forward to their visits to the farm stand. Kids learned about where food comes from by visiting the chickens. It was more than just eggs. It was connection, education, and a reminder that even in modern suburban America, we could still maintain some connection to traditional ways of living. In November, the neighborhood held its first annual harvest festival, organized by the new HOA board. There were booths featuring locally grown produce, homemade crafts, and food. I brought eggs, of course, and also some of Wendy's famous pumpkin bread that used eggs from my hens. The festival was a huge success, with nearly every household participating. At one point during the festival, Michael Torres, the HOA president, pulled me aside. "Blake, I wanted to thank you," he said. "I know this past year was rough for you with all the Patricia nonsense. But the way you handled it, with dignity and determination, that set a good example, and it forced us to really examine what we wanted this neighborhood to be. We are better off now because you refused to back down." "I was just trying to keep my chickens," I said. "Yeah," Michael said. "But sometimes that is all it takes to change things. One person saying no to unreasonable rules. One person standing up to a bully. You did that, and it made a difference." That evening, after the festival wound down and people headed home, I walked back to my house with Wendy. We stopped to check on the chickens, who were already roosting for the night. Gerald was perched on the highest bar, his head tucked under his wing. The hens were clustered together, warm and content. "They have no idea they caused a whole neighborhood revolution," Wendy said, smiling. "Thank God for that," I said. "If Gerald knew how important he was, his ego would be unbearable." We laughed and headed back to the house. Inside, I had a refrigerator full of eggs that needed distributing. a freezer full of food for the upcoming week, and a life that felt fuller and richer than it had in years. The Patricia Whitmore saga had been stressful and frustrating while it was happening. But in retrospect, it had been a blessing in disguise. It had forced me to stand up for myself, to connect with my neighbors in meaningful ways, and to fight for something I cared about. It had brought out the best in the community and gotten rid of someone who was making everyone miserable. And most importantly, my chickens had never spent a cold night without heat. They had been warm, safe, and cared for through the entire ordeal. That had been my goal from the beginning, and I had achieved it despite Patricia's best efforts. As December rolled around and the first real cold snap hit Tennessee, I stood in my backyard one morning watching my breath mist in the air. The chicken coop was barely visible through the trees, just a hint of structure in the far corner of my property. Inside, I knew my birds were warm and comfortable, the heating system keeping the temperature perfect regardless of the weather outside. Patricia had tried to take this away from me. She had thrown every rule, regulation, and threat she could think of at me, trying to force me to give up my chickens or let them freeze. She had bullied my neighbors, misrepresented laws, and eventually resorted to criminal destruction of property. And she had failed. My chickens were fine. My neighbors were happy. The community was stronger, and Patricia was gone, facing the consequences of her actions. I thought about that first citation back in October of the previous year. The bright orange paper taped to my chicken coop, threatening fines and demanding I remove the heating system. I had felt so frustrated and helpless in that moment, wondering how I was going to fight an entire HOA board and their arbitrary rules. But I had fought in my own way. Not with lawyers or lawsuits, though those had played a role. I had fought by simply refusing to accept an unjust rule, by finding creative solutions, by standing my ground and not backing down, and by building relationships with my neighbors, so that when push came to shove, the community stood with me instead of with Patricia. The heated chicken coop that had started the whole conflict was now better than ever, tucked away in its private corner where it bothered no one and kept my birds safe. And the eggs that Coop produced continued to bring joy and nourishment to dozens of families in Willowbrook Heights. That morning, I collected eggs from the coop and brought them back to the house. I sorted them into cartons and loaded up the farm stand. As I worked, neighbors started their morning routines. People waved as they went to get their newspapers or load kids into cars for school. Mrs. Patterson drove by and honked hello. Dave Johnson's youngest ran over to pet Gerald through the fence. This was my life now. Not the one I had planned when I moved to Willowbrook Heights, but a better one in many ways. The divorce, the difficult first year, the conflict with Patricia, all of it had led me to this place. A place where I knew my neighbors, where I contributed to my community, where I had found peace in the simple act of caring for chickens and sharing the fruits of that labor. The sun climbed higher in the sky, warming the December morning slightly. I finished setting up the farm stand and went inside to get ready for work. Through my kitchen window, I could see the first neighbors approaching the stand, a young couple I did not know very well yet. They took a carton of eggs, read the free sign, and left a thank you note with a $5 bill tucked inside despite my insistence that the eggs were free. I watched them walk away, smiling at each other and talking animatedly about what they would make with the fresh eggs. That moment, that simple human connection facilitated by my chickens, made everything worthwhile. Patricia Whitmore had tried to ban my heated chicken coop. She had issued citations, made threats, destroyed property, and done everything in her power to make me give up. But I had moved the coop, maintained the heat, and kept my birds safe and productive. And in doing so, I had accidentally created something bigger than just a source of eggs. I had created a focal point for community, a reason for neighbors to connect. A small act of resistance against the kind of petty tyranny that makes suburban life miserable. And in the end, the neighborhood was better for it. As I drove to work that morning, passing the Willowbrook Heights sign at the entrance to the subdivision, I felt grateful. Grateful for my chickens, for my neighbors, for the difficult journey that had led to this peaceful moment. Even grateful in a strange way for Patricia and her overreach. Without her pushing me, I might never have found the strength to stand up for what I believed in. The HOA had banned my heated chicken coop, or tried to. So I had moved it, and their control over me had disappeared overnight. But more than that, I had helped the neighborhood reclaim itself from someone who had been using power as a weapon rather than a tool for community good. And that, in the end, was the real victory.